Thank you, Ashley. Hi, everyone. Good morning.
Good morning.
So I'm Angie Jones. I'm a consultant automation engineer at LexisNexis. What I do is I consult with agile teams and provide automation strategy. I'm also a practitioner, so I help architect automation frameworks, train testers in automation, that sort of thing. I blog about automation techniques at angiejones.tech, so you can check out some things there and subscribe if you like it. Also, I'm on Twitter at TechGirl1908, so go ahead and tweet me while I talk so everybody thinks I did a good job, okay? So what I want to talk about today is how to get automation included in your definition of done. So this is something that a lot of teams have been asking for lately. How do we get this done in sprint? As we're moving more towards continuous integration, we have everything in line as far as automating stories, but what we want to do is move faster. So how do we accomplish this? So that's what we'll talk about today. Before we move on, I want us to just make sure we're all on the same page. So definition of done, a set of criteria that the team agrees must be completed before a feature can be considered done. So there's a couple of things that stand out to me in this definition. One being team. So this is something that the team must agree to do together. Now, I'm a pretty bossy person. So when I go into the teams, I sometimes try to dictate that this is what they should do. That doesn't really work very well. What I'm learning is that this very much so has to be something that everyone believes that can be done and agrees that it should be done, okay? The other thing that stands out with this definition is that it has to be something that can be accomplished within a sprint cycle. And these sprint cycles are typically, the ones I work in are typically about 2 weeks. Are you guys different, about 2 weeks? Anybody longer than that? How long? 4 weeks, wow, okay. So you really can get it done. So this is something else that they just need to be able to believe that this can be done. So here's a typical standard definition of done that I typically see. The acceptance tests have been identified. Code is committed. The unit tests are passing. We've reviewed the code. Acceptance tests pass, and there's some feature documentation. So what's missing here? Automation, exactly. Is there anybody here who does not have automation included in your definition of done? Show of hands. If you can speak loudly, tell me why not.
We don't have a definition of done.
No definition of done. Let's start there. Anybody else? Time? Time? Anybody else? Huh? Somebody tell me what he said. Cost. Meaning what? Okay. All right. Any other reasons? Difficult. Difficulty of automating something. Okay. So these are standard reasons that I hear for why we couldn't do automation within the sprint. So hopefully some of the things that I talk about today will help you all with those issues. So what I question the teams with is, if you don't have automation included in your definition of done, are we really done? There's a lot that goes on in the sprint, and then with automation, this is still something that needs to be done. And if we're not doing it within the sprint and it's something that needs to be rolled out, are we done? Right? So according to the definition of done that we all agreed upon as a team, yes, we are done. However, you're bringing a whole lot of technical debt with you, right? So if you think about it, we have tests, we have the feature itself, we test it, we have another feature, we test it, and we're moving on and on and on, and we're incrementing this. And automation is typically being thrown on some backlog that some poor automation engineer has to work on in a silo, right? So the automation engineer is not engaged with the team. They don't know a lot about the discussions that have gone on around that feature, why we're building it, that sort of thing. I talked with my good friend Richard Bradshaw yesterday, and we were talking about testing and automation and the types of checks we put into those. And when you're not in the sprint, you just go by whatever is on that test case, right? So whatever was written, you just kind of code that up. When you're in the sprint itself, you get a lot of information, a lot of things that the testers might know because they're embedded in the sprint, like who's the customer, what are their pain points, what's the risk, all these types of things, right? Testers also don't write down everything that they're testing. They see a lot of other different things on the screen subconsciously, and those are not accounted for in our checks. So in shifting left, what I recommend, first of all, is to embed the automation engineers in the teams so that they're a part of the discussion. They hear what's going on. They hear about the clients and the problems and the flaky areas of the code, and they see the bugs that are coming in from our testers. All of this can be accounted for in our automation. Now, after embedding your automation engineers, a lot of the teams think that this is the end all, right? And so in embedding them, I'm going to get in-sprint automation for free. That is not the case. That's the first step, but that won't get you all the way there, right? So a lot of teams, when I talk to them, I have to come up with a customized solution for how do they achieve in-sprint automation based on their context, right? Now, it's different for every team, so it's not a one-size-fits-all solution that I can give you today. However, what I do want to share with you are some techniques that can apply to a lot of these different teams, all right? So this is not the end-all solution. Don't take this back and think just doing these is going to get you all the way there. You still need a solution that's customized for your team, but given these techniques, this should help a lot. So the 3 techniques I want to go over today is, 1, to collaborate with other players. So now that you're embedded in the sprint team, what does that look like? What does that mean for you and the other players? To automate strategically. So we need to move fast as automation engineers in sprint. How do we do that? And then build incrementally. Much like Simon said in his keynote today, don't try to build the entire framework. Start small. Okay, so let's go through each one of these. Collaborating with other players. First of all, I recommend that you collaborate with your business. So your product owners, your business analysts, you want to talk with them and make sure you have an understanding of what it is that we're even building. Why are we building this? What are the risks? What are the problem areas? How have customers use this feature before, if it's an enhancement and not a new feature, those sort of things. And the reason you're asking these questions is because you do not need to automate everything. You want to limit it. How many people have pressure from their managers to automate all the things? Raise of hand. Not as many as I would think. Good. So you guys are on the right track. But you don't want to automate all the things, right? So when we're trying to move fast, we need to automate what's important. Anything that we automate is living, breathing code, so we have to maintain this. So these type of things you need to consider in when you're trying to figure out what should I automate, right? So you want to automate the most important things, the things that will give us the best information. The other person you want to automate with is your tester, okay? So with your tester, you want to figure out, based on the test that they have in mind, which one should you focus on from an automation perspective? So given the context that you have from the business as well, right? So in collaborating with the tester, they have a lot of good ideas on what should be automated, what's their pain points, right? So some things might take much longer for them, and it'll be much more beneficial for it to be automated. Or this might be something that would be in the regression backlog that would have them working weekends or something like that. So talk with them to get an idea of which ones you should go after. Here's an example of a feature. As a user, I want to search the catalog so that I can find specific products. And here are some tests, as many as I can fit on this slide. How many people would automate all of these? Couple of hands. Yeah? Everybody? Not everybody, about 10% or so. Okay, so there's no right or wrong answer here. It's up to you and your team on what makes sense, right? I personally wouldn't automate all of these, and that would be the discussion. Which one of these can we exclude from automation? The other person you want to talk with is your developer. So what I recommend doing is before any coding begins on the feature, set up a meeting with your developer. Bring in a couple of sheets of paper, a couple of pencils, right? Give her a sheet of paper and a pencil, you have a sheet of paper and a pencil. And what you want to do is take that feature, read it. You draw your version of what you imagine this will look like, and have her to do the same, right? Don't cheat. You guys look at your own papers, and then after you're done, compare and see what's different. This is a great discussion because as a tester, we're bringing in a different perspective. We're bringing in our domain knowledge of the application. We're looking at, maybe this feature is a lot like this other feature that we already have in the application, so I want it to look the same and be consistent. So that's why I drew mine like this, right? The developer might have a perspective of, oh, well, I'm using some fancy JavaScript library that has this cool widget that'll do a lot of what I'm trying to do. So that's why mine looks this way. So you have this discussion and figure out what's best for the product and the team, and you come up with a conclusion, right? So you guys compromise on what this should look like. After you have the compromise solution, what you want to do is take it a step further. Go ahead and start identifying your elements. So this is building a contract with your developer. As an automation engineer, you are letting them know the types of things that you need. This will create a sense of empathy, right? So the developer, I don't know about you guys, but for me, that takes the most time, getting a nice, stable locator for my element. And so you can go ahead and, based on the test cases that you're going to automate, start letting them know, okay, I need an ID here, and let's call it this. I'm going to need an ID here, an ID there. Some interesting conversations have come out of these exercises. For example, in this one, this is a search results. And that whole little block is like one result, right? And so in that, I remember once saying, okay, I need IDs on all of these things. And the developer said, well, I get the results from the database and I just loop them, the output, right? So I can't put IDs on everything. The ID would kind of be the same on all of them. And so you start letting them know, like, no, that's not going to work for me as an automation engineer. So for this to be testable and automatable, here's what we need to do. And you guys start coming up with ideas on how you might be able to do that. A lot of developers also, without this technique, they just don't remember. Like, we beg and beg developers to put IDs on things, put some type of identifier that I can get a handle to, and they just don't. They just don't remember when they're coding. I guarantee you, and if it doesn't happen, tweet me, but I guarantee you that given this exercise, you make a copy of this, you take one and you give it to them, that they'll do it, because they'll remember, right? They participate in this exercise and they get it now. Given this, you can take this back to your desk and you can begin writing your automation code before your developer even begins writing their code. So you guys can work in parallel, and automation can be done without you relying on a finished system. 2, the second strategy is to automate strategically, okay? So like I said, we need to move really fast when we're in a sprint cycle with automation. So our Old ways of automating just won't get us there. We have to be more clever. We have to take some shortcuts that don't compromise quality, but are just more clever, okay? So everybody familiar with the automation pyramid, right? Introduced to us by Mike Cohn. Anybody not? Okay, so I don't have to, a couple of hands. Okay, so what this is saying is basically the bulk of your test should be at the unit test level. And then the next largest quantity should be at the service layer. And then you should have a minimal number of UI tests, okay? So as an automation engineer, this is difficult to do, right? I don't see this much in practice. I totally get it. I think everyone gets it and agrees with it in theory. But in practice, when you're given a UI feature, you want to automate it, right? And so that is what I'm seeing a lot in the industry. What I recommend to people is not confining yourself to just one of these layers, right? You can have hybrid tests that live in multiple layers. For example, we have feature 1, search the catalog. As a user, I want to search the catalog so that I can find specific products. Now, if I think about an e-commerce app and searching, so I would need to enter something in the search bar and then look at the results. For me, I can agree that this is something that should be done at the UI level, okay? However, given another feature, add to cart. As a user, I want to view the details page of a product and add the product to my cart. Now, when I think through the steps of how I would do this, or if I looked at the test case, what it would say is to search for the product, look at the results, find the product, click the product, then you're able to see the details of the product, and because I drew it with the developer, I know that there's a button there to add to the cart as well. I can add to the cart right there. So there, if you notice, it's a lot of the same steps from feature 1. So instead of doing that again, I would encourage you to take a shortcut here. So look at your application, see what's going on. When I actually click on that product, what happens? Does the URL change? Is there something that I can take from that URL that's consistent so that when I run my automation, I can just take a shortcut and automatically go to that URL and I can skip the whole search part? So those are the types of shortcuts we want to look for. Because if you think about it, let's say search was broken, right? If search is broken, then this test from feature 1 fails. I'm good with that. That makes sense. However, in feature 2, the purpose of this test is not search. The purpose of this is to ensure that I can add something to my cart, right? So if search is down, I don't want this test blocked by that. Does that make sense? So use the shortcut, skip the whole search part. That'll make your test run faster. They'll be less brittle. You're not going through those same paths. You don't have to be blocked by things that are irrelevant to that test. One more feature. Feature 3, remove from cart. So as a user, I want to remove an item from my cart, okay? Think through the steps. I need to search. I need to look through the results. I need to click on the product. I need to press the add to cart button. I need to click on the cart. And then finally, I get to my test, right? So instead of going through all of that, something like that, like anything that has like a button or something like that, typically there should be some service available. It might be a public web service that your company provides, your product provides, or it could be as simple as hacking it, right? So in a lot of e-commerce, if you look at that button, look at the DOM of that button, right? You can see that there's a form there. So simply take whatever action that form is using, whatever parameters that it was going to pass there, and you can make your own customized service call, right? So do a post. So the way I would go about automating this is I would open the application. I would call the web service call to add the product to the cart. Then my test would just be to click the cart and do my verifications. So I skipped a lot of things there, okay? All right, the third point. So this technique is to build incrementally. So Rome wasn't built in a day, and neither does your automation framework need to be, right? So what I recommend is a TDD type approach. Let's see how big this is. Okay, cool. So a TDD type approach where, everybody familiar with TDD? Test-driven development. So it's where you, usually developers use this technique, right? It's where they define their test first, and then they write the code, just enough code to make that test pass. So I use this same technique in my automation code. So I write the test that I need, and then I call any methods that I think should be there in the framework. The ones that you see in red are ones that are not there, right? So that's my syntax errors. That lets me know that this is framework that I need to build. So I don't take a test and then start building all of the framework around it. I don't take that doc, that mock-up that I got from developers and start building all the framework around it. That'll take too long. We're in a sprint. We need to move quickly, right? The other thing is you don't want dead code. So let's say you don't have any tests that implement those specific areas of the framework. If you add these to your code now, what you're doing is, one, wasting time. Two, you have code that you need to maintain that's not even being used. So if you did need to use it, let's say 3-4 sprints later, and it breaks, you don't know if you introduced it in the wrong way or if it broke, right? So I just don't add that until I need it. The other thing with that is looking at features that are declared like not testable. So here's an example. I can best describe it in an example. So create a new user profile. As a new user, I want to create a profile. So this profile was this feature, right? And it doesn't work. There's a little button there. When you click the button, nothing happens, right? So the whole purpose of this was just to get that part done. So most developers and testers would say that this is not a testable feature, and we'll test that later, okay? That might be fine, but from an automation perspective, what you don't want to do is prolong what you need to do for this feature until the next feature. Let me show you what the next feature looks like. So the next feature is I want to view my created profile. So in the next sprint, the button now works, and it takes you to this page. Now, had I waited, I would need to build all of the tests and framework for this feature and all of the tests and framework for this feature. All of a sudden, I'm now overwhelmed with what I need to do. So what I recommend is taking a look at this and still going through all of the other techniques that I mentioned, talking with the testers. Okay, yeah. When this is ready, when the button is ready, what tests are we going to go after, right? And then go ahead and start scripting out the tests and the framework that you'll need for those tests. Now, they might not be run now. You can put them in progress, but you know that this is coming next. And so you're not overwhelming yourself with both of these, okay? So hopefully, given these techniques, you will now see your definition of done look more like this. Scenarios are automated, okay? So again, the 3 techniques. Collaborate with other players. So you want to collaborate with your business to figure out who's using this, what are we building, who's using it, why are they using it, how are they using it, what are the risk areas, those types of questions, so that you can figure out what to eliminate and what to automate. You want to talk with the testers to figure out how can you best help them to move quicker as well, and what do they view as the most problematic areas. And you want to collaborate with your developers. So getting with them and mocking out what's this feature going to look like. You give your perspective, they give their perspective. You come up with a compromise, and then you identify what elements you're going to need. So you have that contract that you can take back to your desk, and you all code in parallel. Second strategy was to automate strategically, so don't box yourself into just one of those layers on the automation pyramid. You can have hybrid tests that live in multiple ones. And then finally was to build incrementally. So using TDD, build the framework that you need for your test, and don't skip the not testable ones if they will be testable in the near future. Okay? Any questions?
When you were talking about services, you gave two, yeah.
I'm looking for a mic.
No.
Mic 2, there we go.
When you were talking about services, you gave two technical options. Let's call it a URL
Yes.
or a web service.
Right.
What about just calling a JavaScript function on the page? Does it also give you the same result?
As long as you're not manipulating the application. So sometimes I'll see crazy things like someone will use JavaScript to disable a button and then run a test to see if the button is disabled.
Yeah, no.
Like, that's goofy to me, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so things like that, avoid. But if it's like a shortcut to just get, get your test done quicker or move it along in a more strategic way, then sure. Yes.
Hi.
Hi.
So I have a question with the workflow that includes lots of experimenting. So if, let's say, half the features that developers are working on are going to be tested with like 2% of users and then discarded, the other half is going to be like enabled. But at the start, like during the sprint, what you're talking about, you don't know which half is going to be important. So like if you just do everything, half your work is going to be wasted essentially, if you can even keep up. So any ideas how to implement this in a situation like this?
So me personally, I would stress that the team kind of have a definition of ready before we get into starting to try to implement this stuff, right? So that, I don't know your situation, but it seems like a waste of time to do this experimental coding, experimental testing, experimental automation, and then throw it away. It might make sense. I don't know your context, and we can chat afterward, but I would personally stress that we have these things figured out before we jump into the sprint. Okay?
Hi. One of sorry.
Can you wave your hand? I can't
Yeah,
see
sure.
who I'm talking to. Hi.
Hi. I have one question. One of your recommendations is to embed automation engineers in the team. But in my experience, most of the Agile teams have automation engineers embedded. So is it something you found out in a couple of instances where automation engineers are not really part of the team?
Yes, very often. So I see that quite a lot where the automation engineers are not a part of the team at all. So they are working as their own little team. It might be one, it could be, I've seen up to like 5 of them, all working on the backlog. So as sprints are closing, all of the things that they identify as regression, and it's not as sophisticated as this, it's just maybe someone, or everything goes on the backlog, or someone is deciding, okay, of the 50 tests, let's put 40 of these on this automation backlog. And those automation engineers would then just take them off the top one by one. There's no priority to them. There's no real context about what's going on in this story. It's just simply a test case. Do this, expect that. Do this, expect that. And they're automating these in a silo.
Yes. I have a question. When the automation engineer is embedded in the team, is he somehow involved in estimating the stories?
I didn't hear the last part. So when they're embedded in the team.
Yeah, when the automation engineer is embedded in the team, is he involved in estimating the stories or
Good
tickets?
question. Good question. So very much so. The automation engineers are offering a lot of input in these agile rituals, right? So in the meetings, they are saying, hey, wait, that's going to be a lot to automate, right? So we might need to bump that up a little bit, the estimate up a little bit. Or they'll say things about features that are changing things. Okay, so if you change this, let me let you know that all of this is going to break as far as our automation framework. So let's build in time for me to also clean this up in addition to any new things that we want to automate.
Hello. So one question I want to ask is, have you met any occasions that some of the features that your client want can't be really tested automatically in your team because of various reasons? For example, no time, no such resources, or you have to pay some very expensive software that you don't want to pay actually. And how can you actually deal with this kind of test cases that cannot be automated? You have to test it manually. Are you going to talk to your team to say that we just park it here and we will come back later, or we just keep it as it is and test it manually forever?
So it's a discussion, and you bring out, as an automation engineer, you bring out, okay, to automate this, it's going to take this, right? So it might not be impossible, but you know that it's going to take quite a bit of time, or it'll be longer than the scope of this sprint, right? So in cases like that, where it's maybe longer than the scope of this sprint, I recommend people treat it just like they treat the bugs that they do in their sprint. So let's say, for example, someone found a bug, we opened it against that particular story. If that's not fixed by the end of the sprint, typically the team that I work on, we make a decision, or the product owner make a decision, right? So is this something that should escape the sprint and just be carried over to the next sprint, or do we really not close this story because of that, right? And so I recommend doing automation the same way. So is this something that we definitely want automated right now, or can we just roll it over to the next sprint? So that's if it takes longer than the sprint. If it's something that is just terrible to automate, right? Like you're working with third-party software, you don't want to automate their stuff. Just bring those concerns to the team and see how they feel about that.
Well, thank you so much, Angie. We need to get us going, keep us on schedule.
There were at least 2 other questions, so we'll have to find Angie in the hallway.
Okay, find me afterward.
Definitely.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.